Kane Pixels. Kane Pixels did it again. He made a new series. People still live here. Obviously, like everything he's ever made, it's very good, but it's a bit esoteric. Naturally, this series is pretty easy to piece together. If you just sort of take notes like I've been doing. And if you don't spill coffee stains on your notes, they're actually pretty clear. So in this video, I'd like to just run you through this series and tell you about what I think it means. So the series starts off like Kane Pixels usually starts off with his other series. Loud noises and very, very scary. Very frightening. So the first video kicks off in the usual Kane Pixels fashion. It begins with a very brief introduction to the entire concept, usually detailing the major focus. Whereas in his previous work, the major focus was the giant and what he represents, and as such it showed him, in this version we see the laughing head. Now the laughing head isn't brought up again in the 3 videos that we have. This may change, but I think it still serves the metaphorical significance. Moving on, we see that the laughing head and its construction are overlaid with a man on a table. We can presume this to be a name that we will see reoccurring a lot. Saywell, or Clifton J. Saywell, was a man from 1940s America. Clifton Saywell dies. I'm very sorry to say, but he does in fact die. And as he dies, and a little bit after he dies, we see an interesting image. A skyline. A very blue, very bright, very peaceful skyline with Morse code. Now that Morse code literally translates to... And now my body has become one with a faraway land. I am the meadow and the sky all around. You work on the land, and so you work for the land, and in return the land accepts you. You may think your work is finite and conclusive when the time comes to depart, but the land will always remember what you gave it, and in time, you and your work will live on through the land. The second video is relatively odd, not because it doesn't add to the story. In fact, it's probably one of the most important parts of this trilogy of videos, but because it is an adaptation of Clifton J. Saywell's diary. He was often seen around the Hapok Swamp writing in a book. This book was then adapted into a game called People Still Live Here. Now, something important to note is the opener of this game. So, People Still Live Here opens with saying that Clifton J. Saywell documented in his journal that he saw a swamp man tell him when he was young that he must return to the meadow alone. This was meaningless to him as a child, but apparently he understood it as he went into the meadow, and how he got there is relatively important to this entire series, because he went to Hapok Swamp. Now, Hapok Swamp has some mythology around it that I will tell you about after we get through explaining this. See, People Still Live Here continues. He goes into the swamp and he finds a meadow that he was told about. And he finds this meadow that he was told about. This meadow is odd. It's quiet. It's out of place in every possible definition. It is an allotment of different time periods. We can interpret the collection of items as a simple game mechanic. I don't think that he went in there intentionally seeking out perhaps these items unless they hold some sort of personal significance. I think instead that these items were just things that he documented that he knew about, such as a compass and a machinery and a thing of beads. These were things he could easily recognize, probably some of the only things he could recognize, and so documented. So what we have as he progresses is something else. Something whizzes by Mr. Saywell as he's walking, and we don't know what it is, but we know its sound is dinging, like the kind you would see on a train crossing. Now he gets startled by this as he is entering a facility that is not only out of his time, but very important to the rest of this series. This facility is a modern office building with a data center that he uncovers. This, needless to say, is something he really shouldn't have seen. It doesn't make sense for this to be here, and furthermore, it doesn't make sense for him to know about it. And he finds that another person, much like himself, is there. This man has apparently just been in the data center for a while, and he asks some very important questions and says some very important things. For one, he asks if the shepherd is mad at him for doing so. He also states that he wasn't trying to pry on anybody's thoughts while being in the data center, but that he wanted to know where all of his favorite people got moved to. Now, already you could picture in your mind what this means and why he was there. So they leave the building, but something odd happens. The other man gets taken away.
It is important to respect.
We actually end up seeing his corpse in the area behind the You Win section. Then we get to the third video. The third video is the shortest, but provides some more clarity as to what exactly this place is and why it is. See, the third video is just a man with his camera out in the same meadow that Clifton J. Saywell had documented. However, he approaches the train crossing. The train crossing guards are just there, not moving, not acting, but halfway embedded into the ground. But as he gets closer, then they activate. The man, frightened, runs away. This tells us the last and final pieces of information that we need to know. Hapok Swamp is actually pretty important. Before it was part of Massachusetts, the Native Americans who lived there referred it as Hapok Swamp. Now, Hapok actually means something along the lines of the place where spirits dwell, and Hapok was the location of a deity of the dead, Hobomok. He was death himself, but he also was made up of those who had died. Now, this may sound similar to a data center. A data center is parts of data made up into a large and conglomerate whole. This is what I believe is what People Still Live Here is about. It is about that idea. See, from what we could parse together from all three bits, it seems that whatever this land is, it remembers people. It knows who they are. It speaks to Clifton as a child, and then he goes back there as an adult. And when he dies, after he is dead, what we see is that meadow, the skyline of that meadow. He gives his final oration about how the land has remembered him and about how he has now become part of it. We can assume that Hapok, as the place where spirits dwell, is the meadow. It is a meadow, a composite of memory, is a composite of people. So I have two distinct theories from here. So my first theory is essentially an empty afterlife. Clifton is told by the swamp man, who we can interpret as Hobomok, that he should return to the swamp, that he needs to go there. But why would he care? Why would the swamp man, who is presumably this very strange supernatural creature, care if Clifton goes anywhere? Well, because Hobomok is a composite of souls. And when Clifton enters this area, he finds one other person. One other person being in an entire afterlife isn't much of a place of the dead, isn't? But it is if we think about what that other man says. Where have people gone? People used to be here, presumably, but they're gone, they've been moved somewhere else. This afterlife used to be the place where spirits dwell. It was once the land of the dead, but it's gone now. Both the people who used to inhabit that land of the dead are gone, its worshippers are gone, and the only thing that really remains of its original form is the knowledge of what it used to be. So Hapok wants people to go in here. He wants people to find it, but he doesn't want them to leave. If they leave, if they escape, then that just contributes to the problem. The crossing guard is able to capture the other man. Presumably he's still in there, at least his corpse. But Clifton doesn't. But he doesn't escape for long. See, after he dies, we can pretty confidently assume that his soul moves on into the meadow. Hapok has, step by step, rebuilt himself. And I'd also like to comment finally on the shepherd. So the shepherd seems to be responsible for this movement, and I'd like to point out a misconception that I had and that I think might be important later. So the shepherd and Hapok are, I think, two different people. The swamp man, I think, is Hapok, since he's literally the swamp man, but I think the shepherd is somewhere outside of this arrangement, outside of the swamp. He's somebody who moved all of those souls and presumably is responsible for the data center. I don't think it's a literal data center, by the way. I think it's what a man from 1980 could have possibly perceived it as. The shepherd and Hapok are two distinct entities who have different goals, and I think if this series continues, we might see that interaction play out, which is why I wanted to address that right now. I think that that's intentional. Where was everybody moved to could also be interpreted as where has everybody gone, and that man that Clifton sees, much like Clifton himself, went in there thinking people would be there. And he might not be wrong. He hasn't found nobody, he's found the land, and that's everybody. When Clifton dies, we see the meadow, and his oration, his final words, are about how the land has remembered him, about how he has become part of it. What Clifton finds may not be an empty afterlife, but rather, instead, it may be a holistic afterlife. A data center is also a bank of souls, but if we take this as a metaphor for it, we can also interpret it as one entity. The swamp man may not necessarily be a man any more than he is a representation of the bank of spirits that are there. In this theory, I don't really know how the shepherd would interact with this. He seems to be an entity responsible for the data center, but whether he is responsible for this version of an afterlife, or whether he is some sort of different entity entirely, I can't say in this version of the theory. Essentially, what Clifton finds can only be understood once he dies and becomes part of it. He is literally walking on the bank of souls. So I'd like to end this section just by my kind of overview of thoughts about the series. I really like how the series is going. I think it's really good. I know, hot take, I like Kane Pixels' work, but I do like Kane Pixels' work. It's very nice. I really can't wait to see where this goes. I could be wildly wrong about everything that I just told you, and the next video could just be completely disproving everything that I said, and I would still be happy, because both that means I get to make another one of these and tell you about my new theory, and also because this series is really interesting, and I hope that this batch of content continues and we don't wait a year again. We don't wait like a year for another one of these videos. Thank you for watching. I'm glad you listened to me rant for however long this video turns out to be. Bye bye.